Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I'm E.D. Lewis, and welcome back to my reviews. I guess we're going to call this E.D. Lewis Reviews for a little bit and see how that goes, since I can't really do nocturne reviews because it's daylight. And it's my best time to film, actually. Before we get started, I hope everybody had a happy and romantic Valentine's Day, or at least a good Valentine's Day. And if you don't celebrate it, or you're not a fan of it, that's perfectly okay. Not everybody is. I've even heard recently that some people were wanting a second Halloween instead of Valentine's Day. I'm a big fan of Halloween. That's my favorite holiday, and I can see that. But I had a pretty good Valentine's Day, so enough with that. Because that's not what we're here to talk about. Before we get started, also, please like and subscribe to my channel, my videos, and comment on this video and any of my other videos, and tell me what you think. Tell me if you have suggestions, if you like my content, if you want to talk about the content I talk about, you know, Gothic literature and apparently movies now. Please do. So, this time around, we are doing a short story, which I said in my last video I had a couple short stories I could do. This one is an American Gothic story. It's Southern Gothic, published in 1930. And I don't have a physical copy, so you're just going to have to bear with me, because not all these stories do I have in my library. This is A Rose for Emily, published in 1930 by William Faulkner. Now, I don't know if you've read this. I'm sure some of you have out there. It's usually read in school. Usually, I read it in high school for the first time. William Faulkner has written many books and stories, and one of them in particular is The Sound and the Fury, or Sound of the Fury. I get the title confused sometimes, so. But it's a very good book. It's a very complicated book, and it is non-linear, very non-linear. This story is also very non-linear, but not as much as Sound of the Fury. I have my notes with me this time, so that'll help me, because this is a complicated story, and we're not going to talk about the entire story because that would take way too long, and I would love for you guys to go out and read these things, you know, all these books, stories, if possible, you know, because that's how you enjoy them, is you go out and you read them, or you listen to them in an audiobook form, or, you know, whatever. So, as I said, this is a Gothic story. This time, it's about a, well, here, I'll just kind of go about it with my notes, because it's how I like to say it. The story tells of the very peculiar behavior and life of a woman named Emily Grierson? I'm not really sure how to pronounce the name, but it's Grierson, who belongs to a very prominent and wealthy Southern family. So they're the Southern aristocracy. And the story starts at the time of her death and her funeral. And the narrator, we have no idea who the narrator is. It's just an unnamed narrator. Telling the entire story of Emily's life. So, the story goes from her death and funeral, and then proceeds in a non-linear fashion of a record of her life, where many of her secrets and stuff are not revealed until, like, the very end of the story, so we're not going to talk about that. You're just going to have to read it to find out. Or, I guess, read a synopsis if you're interested. The entire story takes place in the post-Civil War, so this is a very hard time for the South in American history. As you know, and I hope you know, because if you didn't, I'd be kind of worried that the South lost that battle, and so they've fallen into some very hard times, and this is actually symbolized through Emily's family, who has also fallen under hard times, and Emily's being, anyway, Emily doesn't have a very big family. Her closest person, the person who she's closest with is her father. And I think the only people in the house are her father, their servant Toby, who functions as a butler, and Emily herself. She does have other family members. There are cousins that come in later in the story for a little while, but we'll get to that. Her father raises her very strictly. He refuses her to marry. He chases off her suitors for his own reasons. I think he doesn't want... I don't think he thinks anybody in the community is good enough for her. There's nobody of high enough rank for her. And also, I think he may be fearing, like, you know, the family legacy and where it would go if it were, you know, tarnished by these people who are just not as good as their family. Her father suddenly dies, which puts her in a very grief-stricken shock, and this is about when she's 30 years old. She refuses, actually, to acknowledge his death, and she keeps his corpse for several days until finally she lets them take it away, and she kind of goes through a little bit of a revival. She changes her hairstyle, she starts teaching China painting to the community, and I think she surprised the community is in complete shock at the way she starts behaving very strangely, and they give her dirty looks and criticize her behind her back constantly. Also, at the time of her father's death, we see this man from the south who's a laborer named Homer Barron. And he comes in and charms her, and they get to know each other and start courting. And she is very interested in marrying him. This shocks, of course, the South because, you know, this northerner coming in, you know, pretty much like a northern invader. And they're kind of concerned about what this is going to do for their community because they're seeing how she's carrying on with him. And this may be a bad influence for the other young people. And so the local preacher ends up calling on her, and he runs away from the house like, I'll never go back there again. And it's never really explained why. And so he contacts her cousins to come in and to try and, you know, nip this whole thing in the bud. Well, Homer Barron disappears at that time for a few days, and she has to deal with her cousins. And around this time, I'm not entirely sure when, she ends up going to the druggist, and she ends up buying a very particular item. I don't want to say what that is, because kind of gives little hints of foreshadowing. So after the cousins leave, Homer Barron returns. She also purchases a toiletry set with his initials on them and stuff, so she's planning on marrying him. He arrives back at her home after the cousins leave a few days later, and is never seen again. So, but Emily starts shutting herself up away from the community again, and she's rarely seen. The next time I think she's really seen, she's a very elderly woman, and she's put on some pounds, no offense to any of that. And at some point, they notice there's a strange smell. They start pouring lye around the house and sneak around her house, and they see these shadows in the windows and stuff. And at some point, there's this colonel who is helping them with the taxes and stuff, and said, oh, you don't need to pay any taxes. It's all been taken care of with an arrangement between me and your father. Well, he dies, and so several years later, when they come to confront her about the taxes, she keeps telling them, I have no taxes. I owe absolutely no taxes. Colonel what's-his-face, I can't remember the name, it's a very interesting name, but I can't remember what it is. Interesting because I've never heard anything like it before. Says, go talk to him. And they're like, we can't, he's dead. So she's not seen again very much until her death and her funeral, and they do find something very mysterious and terrifying in her house after she dies. So we're not going to talk about that because that would be a spoiler. Major spoiler. So, this story is Southern Gothic and deals with many, as does with Southern Gothic, deals with many Southern values, and this one heavily. This, with the traditional Gothic, does deal with death and struggles with change, and especially with the South, how Emily herself and her house, because she keeps everything very much the same, she doesn't change very much, as time goes on and years go on, she tries to keep it exactly the same as when she was 30 and when her father was alive and stuff. So she represents the unchanging South. You know, the South that refuses to change after what happened with the Civil War. And the hard times, you know, with her family representing the South in general, it's been hit by the hard times after the war. Homer Barron, however, who is a Northerner, he represents the North who rejects the South's way of life and tries to bring in change and you know, that type of stuff. I want to make this video as brief as possible, so we're not going to talk a whole lot about the story, but I would highly recommend it, especially if you love American literature and William Faulkner, who's kind of a difficult author to read. And if you like Southern Gothic, I'd check it out. And it is very creepy, very disturbing things happen in it, and it is an air of mystery. What is going on? You know, why is this woman acting this way? Which I think we've already kind of discussed that, but, you know. So, it's A Rose for Emily, published in 1930 by William Faulkner. I'm sure you can find it online. You can probably find it in a collection of William Faulkner's works. So I'd highly recommend it. I have no props today, but you can check out my book, which I forgot to grab for the video. The Curse of Ridge House by E.D. Lewis. It's a Gothic novel, Gothic romance, but it's a story about a girl named Brianna Gale who comes to a house basically almost in the middle of nowhere in this small town after coming from a big city. She's trying to prove to herself and to those that back home that she can't make it out in the world away from everything she knows, and she's hoping to start a career for herself and build a brand new life. And then tragedy strikes and she finds herself in the middle of mystery and terror in the house called Ridge House. So please comment and like my videos, subscribe, and I hope everybody has a good weekend. I do have a couple other short stories, and I want these videos to also go kind of quick too, since they're, you know, short stories as opposed to novels. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you check out the story by William Faulkner. That's A Rose for Emily, and I hope everybody had a great holiday, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. So see you soon. Bye-bye.